Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Recipe Redemption. I'm Mike Uyak. We're taking another trip in the Wayback Machine to the 18th century. I've kind of been inspired lately watching some channels like Townsend's, which I highly recommend. And I got this recipe off of them, or the idea for it. So you should definitely check out Townsend's on YouTube. Have a great channel talking about specifically cooking in the 18th century America specifically. I think there are some episodes either further afield or a little bit later into the early 19th century, but primarily sort of Revolutionary War America time frame. And really informative and fun to watch, so highly recommend it. But this recipe comes from them, and specifically this is from Hannah Glass's The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, which far exceeds anything of the kind yet published. Not grandiose at all. From 1774, this is a recipe for asparagus forced in French rolls. Take 3 French rolls, take out all the crumb by first cutting a piece off the top crust, but be careful that the crust fits again the same place. Fry the rolls brown in fresh butter, then take a pint of cream, the yolks of 6 eggs beat fine, a little salt and nutmeg, stir them well together over a slow fire till it begins to be thick. Have ready 100 of small grass, that's asparagus, boiled. Then save tops enough to stick the rolls with, the rest cut small and put into the cream. Fill the loaves with them. Before you fry the rolls, make the holes thick in the top crust and stick the grass in that it may look as if it were growing. It makes a pretty side dish as a second course. Now, this isn't a section referring to entertainments, and it's a very different world in 18th century America when asparagus cooked in a French loaf with some stalks of asparagus sticking out of it as entertainment. It says also somewhere in the description of this recipe, makes for fine conversation. So this is a conversation piece. Sure, why not? So let's give it a try, see if it's any good. Just reading through the recipe, I'm not even 100% sure how you're supposed to eat it, but let's give it a shot. Going to start off by cutting my asparagus into short bits and then boiling them for just about 4 or 5 minutes until just barely tender. Generally, boiling isn't a good idea with asparagus. You should steam or roast or something because a lot of those nutrients and flavor end up in the water. But I'm going to be using that asparagus broth later. Here you see me toasting the French roll. Nothing too exciting about that. Just some butter in a pan. And in my saucier here, I have heavy cream, salt, pepper. Just threw an egg yolk and a little bit of nutmeg there, and over like medium-low heat, I'm going to whisk this and just heat it up until it starts to thicken. Alternatively, you can do this over a bain-marie. It's probably better, but I'm lazy. Didn't want to set one up. When the custard starts to thicken, you can throw your cooked asparagus into it and continue whisking until the desired consistency. You don't want this to set up completely. You're making more of kind of like a creme anglaise sort of thing. And then to assemble, take your hollowed out French roll and stuff with asparagus and the cream sauce / custard. This is kind of long and narrow, so not a whole lot fits in there, but fit as much as you can. And don't forget to spoon in some of that custard in there. It will soak into the bread, but you want to try and fill this as much as you can with this mixture. And lest we forget, the recipe says to poke some holes in the bread lid and stick some of the asparagus through it so it looks like it's growing at the top. Yay. And here we have it. Asparagus stuffed in a French roll. How entertaining. You think this will be a conversation piece at your next dinner party? Let's find out. Sure. So, we have our asparagus, and you've basically made a custard that kind of soaks into the bread a little bit. But there were a lot of, particularly 17th, 18th century, and a little bit before too, where things like pies, the outer casing, the pie crust, excuse me, was kind of considered to be a cooking vessel rather than the actual food. So there were pies that you just encased in a simple pie dough, or a paste, as they would have called it back then, cooked, and then you ate the filling inside, and you threw away the crust. So I don't know if this is intended in the same way that the French roll or the French, well, mini baguette that I've chosen to use is intended just as a serving vessel, and you're just going to be eating the asparagus that you stuffed inside, or if this was intended for you to actually eat in some way. So let's just try it on its own. It's fine. The custard, the egg yolk really, and the cream obviously gives it a richness that plain old asparagus just simply doesn't have. Which is why we often eat it with like butter or some sort of cream sauce over it, or a Parmesan cheese with it, something like that, to add richness, because otherwise it's just a grass. Let us not forget that asparagus is basically a grass. So, no, I don't mind asparagus. It's not my favorite vegetable, but I don't mind it. The custard does help. The nutmeg really does come through. Now, just out of curiosity, what does the bread taste like? Very buttery. And honestly, the butter and the salt and the converted starches of the toasted bread really overpower the custard. Let's try a bite together. I think if I had refrigerated this, let that custard actually set in the fridge, and then cut this into chunks, it could be eaten that way. I don't know if they intended it to be. But otherwise, oddly enough, the French bread overpowers the flavor of any of the custard that actually soaked into the bread. You really do need a whole mouthful of that custard and the asparagus with the bread to really be a complete flavor, if indeed you were intended to eat it with the bread. Again, I don't know. It's not bad. It is a little simple. If you're gonna eat asparagus with some sort of creamy sauce or something with it. Encased in bread. I think there's a more modern way to do it. Now you recall I saved some of that asparagus broth, about a couple cups worth of it, and I've added some chicken bouillon to this, along with some sautéed shallots here and the remainder of the asparagus. Meanwhile, in my saucier, I'm melting a couple tablespoons of butter, to which I've added a couple tablespoons of flour and cooked on medium heat to toast up the roux to a light brown color. And to this, I'm adding some of that asparagus broth, trying not to add any of the actual asparagus to this, but I think I managed to get a couple in there. That's okay, doesn't really matter. And in addition to that, some heavy cream. And just whisk that around, adding either more heavy cream or more of the asparagus broth to that, just so it doesn't get too thick. Make sure that you've whisked out all of the lumps, and then set that off to the side while I use an immersion blender to blend up the asparagus bits. And this will take a little while to chase after all the little parts to make sure that this is blended smooth. But once it is, keep it at a simmer and add that thick bechamel sauce. And get as much of it out of the pan as you can. And whisk that in until it is smooth. If necessary, you can pull out the immersion blender again and whiz it through to make sure that this is combined and is nice and smooth. But that will thicken the mixture, make it nice and creamy, and you can see there are a couple bits of asparagus still floating around. And what happened to the bread, you say? Well, this is what happened. I hollowed out a bread bowl and filled it with the asparagus soup. That is actually a brioche roll, so I made sure to toast it really well. So, pretty simple. Cream of asparagus soup, served in a bread bowl. A modern take on a very old idea. No, I will not be making asparagus stuffed in a French roll ever again. But cream of asparagus soup? Sure. We'll keep it in the rotation. Again, asparagus is not my favorite vegetable in the world, but it's tasty enough. So, what do you think? What other recipes should I try? Let me know in the comments below. And again, I'd like to thank you for watching. I'll see you next time here on Recipe Redemption.